Welcome to day 4 of the 11th annual SISE conference and the last day that AES co-hosts. Though I can assure you, we're going to come back on next Friday for the fellows presentation, final presentation. It's been an amazing run and an amazing week. We've had 34,000 event engagers, obviously a record. Great panels, thoughtful speakers, powerful ideas, and just as our co-hosts asked for, lots of critical thinking, right, George? Thank you, Baum Family Fund, Wilson Sonsini, Electrify America, ORIC, and all the other sponsors, and thank you, SISE fellows. Thomas and George, thank you. You have an amazing program, and I hope we at AES have contributed in some small way to its success. And now we arrive at the moment we've all been waiting for. The spotlight shines on Denmark, and I don't mean just its soccer team. That was a great run, I'm sorry. Sorry for the outcome, I was rooting for it. But Denmark is doing something even more significant. Denmark is showing the world how to transition to a new energy economy. I can cite many statistics to show this, but one in particular stands out: 37%. 37% of all energy consumed in Denmark is generated without emissions, and the trend line slopes positive. By 2035, that total will most likely be more than half. As a point of comparison, the United States uses 21% of all of its energy from renewable or low carbon, non-carbon sources. 37%. On the one hand, that number is unprecedented. On the other hand, it has to be duplicated by the world soon. There are many questions that swirl about this awesome number. What, when, where, how? To answer these questions, I'd like us to return to a comment from our keynote speaker this year, Dr. Kimberly Miner, who reminded us that to understand something, we have to measure it first. And that's what we did. It began with a conversation between me and Stephanie Christensen at the Innovation Center of Denmark in Silicon Valley. Then a team came together: the State of Green, Energy Cluster Denmark, Green Energy, Green Hub Denmark, Invest in Denmark, Ørsted, Danish Energy Agency, DI Energy, advice from Sally Benson at Precourt Center at Stanford University, and many, many AES research associates, many. And together, we built a map, but not just any map, an interactive map that identifies every single energy venture in Denmark, its location, organized by 3-layered taxonomy. There are many use cases for this map, but perhaps its greatest value is that it offers in visual form best practices that the world can emulate. In other words, this is what a transition to a new energy economy looks like: diverse, dispersed, and dense. As we unveil the map today and its many uses, I turn to our partners for commentary and context. Charlotte Gjedde, Bo Riisgaard, Oyvind Vesche, the map is yours. What should we be looking for before we show this map?
Thank you very much, Eric, for the kind introduction and the kind words on Denmark. We're also very proud and honored to be invited to be part of this SISE conference and have a whole session where we can zoom in on the Danish experience. So that's what we will do today. So in order to get a good idea of what the Danish energy ecosystem is actually about, we are going to have some presenting from both the public and the private side to share with you our experiences from Denmark, how we have created this decarbonized energy system to a degree, and also what we are aiming to do in the future. So very excited to be part of this today, and also very excited to have both Bo Riisgaard and Oyvind Vesche as part of the session. But before we go into a short dialogue on what's actually the experiences from this Danish ecosystem, I'm just going to shortly run through the program and also introduce you some of these numbers Eric has so kindly already introduced. So yeah, the program is that we will have this introduction, then we will have a short panel on what has been the success story, and then I am very excited for Katie and Eric from the American Energy Society to launch the map so you can see and learn how to use it and hopefully be inspired to how we can engage further afterwards. But without further ado, I will actually just get started, and I have brought some slides with me. So Yeah, I hope you can see it. If you cannot something, yeah, you can see it. Great. So yeah, so again, hello everyone joining on this call and live. My name is, as said, Charlotte Gjedde, and I'm head of partnerships in the organization called State of Green. Shortly, State of Green, we are an organization. We are a public-private partnership. And what we aim to do is promote Danish green solutions and the experiences that we've had from Denmark to international decision makers and stakeholders and partners. So everything within energy, water, circular economy, and cities, all the experiences we've had from Denmark, we're trying to share. And the reason we're doing that is because we believe that we can, through collaboration and dialogue, we can contribute to a global green transition. Because Denmark is a very small country in the north, and we only represent a small portion of the global CO2 emissions. So in order for us to have the real impact, we look to international partnerships. But enough about us. As said, I would just introduce this Danish green transition and some background before we go into the dialogue. So it actually started in Denmark way back before I was even born, back in the 1970s. And it started with the international global oil crisis, which hit Denmark quite hard because we were actually 99% dependent on imported energy and on fossil fuels. So this hit the Danish economy quite hard. And there was a lot of socio-economic consequences, which made the public and society demand of the decision makers, the political decision makers, that we had to look to alternative fuels so we could build a more robust energy system. So the question back then was not so much about being environmentally or climate friendly, but more about how we can build a more robust society and have energy security. Just jumping forward, some important decisions that you need to understand why it is like it is that in 1985, the Danish parliament decided to say no to nuclear power. So we don't have any nuclear power installed in Denmark. And at the same time said yes to the expansion of wind energy and also focused on energy efficiency in regulation. So how do we make sure that our energy consumption in both industry and at the consumers and in our buildings can become more energy efficient to also support this robust energy system. Jumping way forward to 2012, this is a really important year when looking at the green transition, because that's when the Danish parliament decided on a goal that Denmark should be independent of fossil fuels by 2050. So it's of course characterized that it's very ambitious. It was one of the first, we were one of the first countries in the world to set such a target, but also very importantly that it's long-term and also have a broad political support. So almost all member parties of the Danish parliament, they are behind this agreement. And that ensures that the private sector and the investment community can be sure that investing in a fossil-free future is good business, because the goal is not going to change and it's not becoming less ambitious. We have also set a new target. I will get into that, but just to underline what Erik said about this energy mix we have in Denmark. So from the 2019 numbers, more than 30% of our energy mix comes from renewables, and a big chunk of that is biomass, which is a huge part of our heating system in Denmark, but of course also wind energy, as we're going to hear more about in the discussion as well. And if you look solely on the electricity consumption, wind and solar actually produces more than half of our electricity mix. Yeah, and this new target that we set in Denmark in 2019, I just want to highlight this because that's all we're talking about in Denmark right now. it's the 70% target. So in 2030, in 9 years, we aim to reduce our CO2 emissions by 70% compared to 1990. At the same time, we have also introduced a target in 2025, as you can see, where we aim to reduce it by 50 to 54%. And this very ambitious target is something that we're aiming to do, but we don't really know how yet. We don't have all the solutions. And that's also why we are very happy to be working closely together with American Energy Society on this map, because we also hope that we can learn something in Denmark on how we can implement new and innovative solutions in our system. To the future here, as said, we want to reduce our CO2 emissions, and there are just some other targets on how we're also part of the European Union's goals tag on both energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reduction. The last thing I want to highlight, because that's also something that I hope we can discuss later, is something we call climate partnerships. So on the path towards our 70% target, the Danish government have invited the entire private sector and industry to come with their recommendations on how we can reduce our CO2 emissions by 70%. So here in the picture, you can see the Danish Prime Minister, Ministry of Business and Climate, and then a bunch of important people from the private sector, CEOs. And what they all did was engage actively in working on how can we ourselves as a sector, for instance, the energy sector, how can we reduce CO2, but also how can we also contribute with CO2 globally, and what should the Danish government and society do in order to enable these recommendations. So that's a really interesting model and an important part of our plans to how we do become even more green in the future as well. And then on the long term and long run, we aim to be this low carbon society. We are going to put an end to oil and gas extraction in the Danish North Sea. We also aim to actually produce more renewable energy that we consume ourselves, so we can export this renewable energy to our neighbors, our neighboring countries. And some of the places where we are not really sure how to do it yet is how, when we look at our agriculture, transportation, and building sector, how do we decarbonize these even more in order to become this low carbon society? Yeah. That was actually it, the short introduction. So as you can see, it has actually already taken us quite some time to get where we are today. And we need to accelerate the transition in Denmark even further if we want to reach our targets. So that's what I also hope we can discuss a bit now. I'll just stop sharing my screen. And then I would like to invite my two co-panelists. First of all, Riisgaard Pedersen from the Danish Energy Agency, and also a so-called energy attaché. So you can say you are the energy diplomat from Denmark at the Royal Danish Consulate in Silicon Valley. And then also introduce Alvin H, who is the head of regulatory affairs in the European region at Ørsted, one of the major European energy companies, and also a great case from Denmark on how we have actually gone from black to green energy. So welcome. And maybe if I can just start with the question of, how do you see and what do you see as the key elements of this transition we just introduced here, and how we've been able to reach this 35% renewables in our energy mix? Maybe, Bo, if I can start with you from with the public glasses.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Charlotte. And just to add to everyone, a bit of perspective to your presentation there. So the 70% reduction we are looking at for 2030, for the next 9 years, we actually have to reduce as much as we've done from 1990 till now. So just to give you a taste of what the size of the challenge is. So it's actually, it's pretty massive. And I also just want to say thank you to SISE Fellows and AES for having us here. I hope that we can instill some hope in everyone. I mean, you can easily get a little bit, depressed when hearing the challenge we have with the climate, how bad things look. I hope we can instill hope in you guys and say it can be done, and it has already been done. You know, the Green New Deal is alive and well in a small part of the world, and we just need to scale that. So happy to share some of our experiences. Back to your questions a lot. I think I want to start off with a story. I've heard that's always a good idea. So when I was a small kid growing up in Denmark, ages ago, of course, in the previous millennia, I recall the grown-ups discussing wind turbines, and they spoke very highly of them, basically because they had one of the good things the government made in the early days of wind turbines was making it able for local citizens to have like local ownership of wind turbines. So you're living next to a wind turbine and you're actually investing, and it was a good investment. That's what I recall. The grown-ups saying that's really good investment and it's good for the climate. So you really got, the general public hooked on the idea. This is good stuff. Whenever they see a wind turbine, they would think about that's good. And I think that speaks a little bit to some of the key elements we have. We need support from the general public, otherwise it's not going to happen. If we have that, we can have politicians put up ambitious goals and targets and visions, but we also still need, the innovative entrepreneurs, the really strong business community and businesses who are willing to take on the challenge and charge ahead. And I'm sure Oyvind will speak to that in a bit. So I think generally speaking, it's the combination of the three, and not least the interaction between the ongoing interaction. So politicians, good at setting up visions, business and companies, usually pretty good at getting things done.
Yeah, thank you, Bo. And let that be a great introduction to you, Oyvind. So business are good at getting things done. And that's probably also a key part of the story of why we reached the target. But maybe also your input on this question. What do you see as the main elements of the Danish energy transition? And do you agree with Bo's point that it's this interaction between the different partners as well?
Yeah. And let me first say thanks a lot to the organizer for inviting me. It's an honor to be here representing Ørsted. I must say I really agree with Bo points. I think if we look back at the story, I mean, in Ørsted we make a lot of offshore wind, and we make a lot of offshore wind projects. They are now cheaper. Like the energy from offshore wind is cheaper than conventional electricity sources, be it gas, be it coal, be it nuclear, which is, by the way, also the case for onshore wind and solar. But if we look just 10, 15 years ago, that was not necessarily really the case, and certainly not for offshore wind. Offshore wind was a niche and something that was tremendously expensive. If you look at how much you need to pay per kilowatt hour of electricity being produced. So what this partnership that Bo is referring to, what that has achieved is to really bring down the costs of this technology and the other renewables technologies. And that's why we can now actually much more at lower costs make that huge transformation and produce all the energy with renewable sources, as long as we get the citizens to go along with that transformation and the industries that need the energy. Then this is now something that is actually affordable and doable. But that would not have happened if it was just down to the businesses, because that did not make any business sense whatsoever, because this electricity was just much too expensive. So what the frameworks from like the Danish government, the British government, the German government, those were like front runners in giving us in industry a very clear framework to work under and a possibility to scale up this industry and these technologies. And that's really, in my view, a key part of why we are where we are today, where renewables is just undercutting in costs all other competing technologies, and thereby making the green transformation much more possible. And yeah, to me, that is really a key part of this interaction between the public sector and the private sector.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ivan. I actually, just on this cost of technology, we had a really interesting question in the chat I'm just gonna highlight. So we talked about these ambitious goals we have in Denmark and what we've been able to do. And I think a funny question is, so you are actually setting goals without no theory and no preliminary approach solutions in mind. Like, it's a very ambitious target that sounds very costly and also time consuming if it fails. And I think that's interesting because in Denmark, or at least the Danish Ministry of Climate, they're saying, well, our goals, it is a moonshot goal. It is something that it's like the US saying we want to put a man on the moon. It's the same that we're trying to do in Denmark. We don't have all the solutions. So maybe based on what you're saying here, or even what we actually did way back, is set an ambitious target that also drove the private sector to invest in these offshore wind technologies. We had subsidies in order to make them more competitive and more efficient. Do you see the same when we look towards 2030, like this ambitious goals that might sound very, we don't have the concrete plans yet and so on? How do you see this, Ivan? As is it also something that's driving the technologies in the future as well?
Yes, I would very much say so. I think a very concrete example is like the hard to abate industrial sectors. Take, for example, aviation. There is not really a prospect of battery-driven airplanes. And biofuels are somewhat limited in terms of their, the area of the planet is not big enough to grow enough biofuels to power all the aviation. And what is then a possibility is to create synthetic kerosene via hydrogen. So you then need an electrolysis process where you use electricity, renewable electricity, to make then renewable hydrogen, which is then further made into kerosene that you can fuel the planes with. But if you look at a liter of hydrogen-derived kerosene today, that will be a very expensive liter of fuel. But we're trying to kind of do the same thing here again, building up a partnership between the public sector and the private sector to make sure that we get those technologies that we need commercialized and scaled up so that they can deliver the solutions that society needs. So it's, of course, nuances and differences, but I can very much start to see a lot of similarities in what you're describing, yeah.
Thank you, Ivan. And do you have any input on this, Bo, on looking at how do we ensure that this transition we need to go further with in Denmark and also other places, that it isn't too costly and we don't waste our time? Do you have any input on this?
I certainly do. And yes, it is quite amazing to set a target and then figure out how to get there, especially the latest target of the 70%. So I work, when I'm not posted here to the US, I come from the Danish Ministry of Climate, Energy and Utilities that are responsible for making the plans to get us there. And at the time the announcement was made, we knew pretty much how to get to maybe 60% reduction. But the last 10%, we didn't know, and we don't know yet. There's a few pathways we can do. One of the things, though, I think is important before you even begin on the journey is one thing. Now you have the ambition and the long-term target, and you have businesses standing by. Ørsted is sort of looking, so come on guys, what are we supposed to do? And the glue between that is the regulatory bit, where I usually sit and trying to connect vision with businesses and markets. So how can we get the markets to do what we like them to do to achieve our vision? And one thing we do, I think that's very Danish, is energy planning, long-term energy planning. It sounds extremely boring, but then again, I'm an energy engineer, so sometimes we have to be just a little bit boring, and we can't talk about moonshots all the time. We also have to say, hey guys, so if we plan in this direction, this is roughly the cost we're looking at. If we plan in this direction, there's a different cost to society, and so forth. And those scenario planning is very important. And what is equally important is that everything that goes into these modeling exercises, that is transparent and open. So the way typically in Denmark, when we talk energy systems, everyone has their own model. Everyone has a model, and they test things, and then there's discussion and dialogue. But the data that goes into the models, that's all the same. So that's one of the. I know it's very boring. It's not like, green hydrogen and wind turbines. It's, making sure that everyone in the modeling use the same data sets for inputs. And that's actually a long process to get experts to agree on what's the cost of this technology in 2030. That's impossible almost. But we do it anyways. And then not everyone's satisfied, but everyone sort of say, okay, yeah, that's the best of the best we can get, and we'll use that. And once you have that in place, you don't discuss, the input going into everyone's models. You're discussing the output, and then you can start to move the regulation in the right direction. Politicians can decide, okay, so it seems like green hydrogen power tracks. That looks like, there's a lot of work that needs to be done on research, demonstration. We need to get the markets rolling. We have, there's a lot of risk we have to allocate. But that seems to be the most promising solution. Let's go down that route. So I don't know if I actually even answered your question, but that's my look upon this. There's some glue that's needed to get from vision to markets.
And also, it's a discussion we're also having in Denmark. I guess we're like picking the winners or picking the problem also when being from the public side in order to which pathway should we actually take, because there's a lot of different potential technologies, but which should we invest in as well? I guess it's also a discussion we have to take into account.
Very much so. And I think the former Secretary of Energy here in the US, Ernest Moniz, I think he's famed for saying we only pick winners. So that's one way to go. But it's true. We have to make sure that it's still technology neutral. To the extent possible, but there are some technologies that we cannot live.
So, now you also mentioned the US, and I guess that's also an important question for both of you. So these experiences that we have from Denmark is also based on a different country. We're only 5.6 million people, and we're a very small country in that sense. But are there any of the experiences that we can take both from our projects, or maybe some of the ways that we've built the plans or the targets in any way that we could also make sure that we share with the US? Do you think there's anything we can share or maybe translate or scale to the US context? What do you say, Øyvind? I know Ørsted is working very actively in the US and on the East Coast. How have you made sure that it's built on the Danish experience as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have, in fact, several wind farms now on the East Coast in the US. It's extremely exciting markets and lots of things going on. And the new US administration is also, slightly more positive towards the green agenda than the previous. So we can really feel we have a lot of, let's say, wind in the blades these days. In terms of learnings to bring across, I think the US East Coast states are doing a lot of the right things at the moment. I think they have really picked up a lot of the learnings from Denmark already. So I think there's just to build on that. And there's also, I think, the Danish Danish state is also, Danish government is very good at sharing best practices and making sure that, you know, this is not something they have patented. They are very happy to share both mistakes as well, because that's what you learn from, but also to share best practices. And I think it would be, it would be difficult for me to kind of point out one particular thing that is not happening in the US now, because I mean a lot of things are moving in the right way in terms of the East Coast US states now in terms of offshore wind.
Yeah, thank you, Ivan. So exactly what you're saying here, also make sure that we share some of the mistakes that we probably also did in Denmark, because we're not perfect in any way. But what do you say? Because that's basically what you do, right? You're sharing the experiences from Denmark with the US. And what is it that you're telling them? What is it that we can maybe help with or contribute with?
Yes, we do that. And that is very nerdy stuff, I'm sorry to say. But there's a range of topics where I know we have world-class lessons to share, also things not to do. So energy efficiency, I just want to highlight, and we cannot understate enough how important energy efficiency is in this green transition. If you reduce your energy consumption, the whole transition is going to be much more cost effective. And it's still, whatever you hear anyone else say, it's still cheaper not to use energy than it is to keep building solar and wind, because we need that solar and wind to go into the sectors that are hard to decarbonize, like the transport sector. So that's an area where we have a lot of experience to share. We have some of the world's most efficient manufacturing industries. Then, of course, offshore wind is another topic. We've spent a lot of time making mistakes, trying to get offshore off the ground or putting steel in the waters. And some of the lessons learned there, we are happy to share. So how do you make sure in your tender procedures that you have an industry dialogue, like a pre-tender market dialogue, that really increases, the hit rate of your tender and decrease risk perceived by investors. Not to say that the government or the state should take all the risk, but you should just make sure you allocate the risk to where it's most cost effectively met. That's offshore wind, but we also learn. So I'm in California now, and of course California has done a lot of work on EVs, zero emission vehicles, transportation, and we have a team back in my home ministry looking at that right now. So we engaged in a dialogue, California, to learn, so how many chargers do you need? Where do you put them? What's the infrastructure that goes into this? But also how's people's behavior on this? How come there are some people who have an EV and then after they've used that for a couple of years, they sell it off and buy, a gasoline car afterwards? Why is that? We don't have any idea about that, but there's a lot of knowledge here in California that we can use to as a guide for our own strategies. So, yeah, and I can go on and on, but I won't.
No, but I think it's really important what you underline here, Bo, is that we are, of course, trying to share our experiences on both having production and energy efficiency, but also very keen to learn from the US stakeholders as well on your innovations, because they are also very interesting for us in Denmark when we want to reach these targets. So we only have a few minutes left of this discussion, and I really want to point to you, Eric, because I can see that there's a bunch of questions coming in the chat, and they're all really good questions. So I don't know if you can pick some of them, if there's anyone we need to take as part of this.
Sure. And by the way, we have questions coming in many different angles. So yes, the fellows, they're amazing, brilliant. So one of the running themes throughout the whole conference has been democracy tends to be, we haven't really addressed it, but democracy tends to be really slow moving, and capital tends to be lacks creativity and perhaps public good awareness. Let's just call it that. Sometimes both. And it sounds that, Denmark, you have mentioned there's a question from Marco in Washington, D.C. about the public-private partnership model. We had on our capital panel a conversation about creative capital. Creative capital, that was our investor finance panel. Creative capital, but they never mentioned this public-private partnership. Public meant public company with public sale of stock or public debt, but I was wondering, it sounds to me, Charlotte, you said at the beginning, and Øyvind and Bo, you've referenced kind of dialogue and collaboration over and over and over. Public-private partnerships. What can you teach the U.S.? What is it? Just dialogue? Is it creative capital? What's going on here? That's a question from Marco in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, thank you. I can start with being a public-private partnership and State of Green. I think it's a one sentence we say to each other is basically that, you know, we are stronger together in the sense this is a cross-sectoral and societal issue and challenge. If we want to solve it, we need to make sure that we have all the right brains in the room. The public, as we've heard, are great at setting the target and the regulations, but they might not know what the best technology and innovation is. And that's where the private sector come in, because that's what their expertise is. So basically making sure that we have everybody who can contribute to this path as part of it. But I would let both Bo and Øyvind answer as well, because I know that's something that you are both pointing to, but maybe Øyvind?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, just getting the different actors together around the same table and flash out, you know, what kind of different sectors contribute with, and how can we make this work together has a tremendous value in terms of increasing the efficiency of the overall process. So that's something that we're really seeing working well, I think, in Denmark, and it's something that we in Ørsted, we are, I would say, investing more and more time and efforts into to partnerships with different actors, because we also just see that time is short. We only have 30 years to reach net zero, and you know, we're far from it where we are today. So the infrastructure and the changes that needs to happen in that short time frame is of such a character that we just need to talk together and have partnerships in order to have the speed and the change at the appropriate speed. Otherwise, we will never make it.
Yeah. Bo?
Yeah, I fully agree. Maybe I could just add an example. So speaking to the 70% reduction that we didn't know how to get to. So the ministry established what we call climate partnerships, which is basically, there were 13 different partnerships, each one representing a business sector. And it all the partnerships were chaired by company CEOs. And the aim of the partnerships was to get each individual sectors, have them chip into, okay, so we have this target. How do you see your sector contributing to that target on behalf of Denmark? And what we saw was that they actually became a little bit competitive in those partnerships on how we can do more. So for instance, the manufacturing industry, they found out that they could pretty easily get to an 85% reduction of GHG emissions. And then they would be fine. It's only 70%, you know, for the whole country. So it's 85%, guys. But they didn't. They actually went beyond that. And then they wrote down 61 specific action points to take them to climate neutral. So the ambition and the vision of the manufacturing industry was actually to be the first climate neutral manufacturing industry in the world by 2030, which is only 9 years away. So that's just one example of engaging with industry in a different way. I don't think we've seen, I certainly haven't seen similar partnerships anywhere in the world where I've been. So that's a very concrete suggestion. The idea can be exported to other countries, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Bo. So yeah, Eric, go ahead.
So we want to get to the map, but these questions, they keep coming in. We're going to do one more question from a fellow. I think I have a feeling, if I can provide context, we all know, I'm going to say what we all know, the United States probably has a tough time bringing multiple parties with different opinions together to the same table. The United States struggles with that. And that might be the reason why we have a lot of questions about this consensus building, but what you just described, Oyvind, what you just described in terms of the benefits, and Bo, your example. But I think that we keep coming back to, Adele had a question about what about the stakeholders that maybe don't have a voice, but Noah had that first question. So yeah, Adele wants to know, how do you navigate the beyond outside of Denmark and those stakeholders? So how does this, I think the question is, how does this consensus building process work? Noah, why don't you go for it? I think you had a great way of phrasing it.
Sure. So I just brought up that you had mentioned that kind of all the parties in Denmark had kind of rallied around this goal. So my question was, how was that agreement reached between the parties, and how can it be replicated by other countries?
Yeah, I can try to begin, but I hope maybe, Bo, you have some input here as well, because that's the Ministry of Climate who also ran those negotiations. But I think it's a tradition. First of all, it's important to understand that we are this country in the world, Denmark, a small country, and it is a consensus build culture that we have. But this political agreement was also made because the Danish citizens, they actually voted on climate. So in our last elections, what we saw is that 7 out of 10 people voting, they prioritized climate as the top reason for where they put their vote. And I think that put a major pressure on these parties that they need to be part of an ambitious target, because otherwise they would lose their votes. And that's also where we can see the citizens coming in with their voice and pushing and changing the way as well. But maybe, Bo, you can give us some details on how do you actually make sure we have all these parties behind a goal like this?
Oh, that's a really tough question. But no, you're entirely right, Charlotte. So what you need to know about Denmark and Scandinavia in general, I think, is that we have a lot of parties. So we have more than 2. And for the long-term agreements we've had in Denmark, at least, I know the broad spectrum of political parties have always been part of that long-term vision. So when governments change, targets stay in place, subsidies stay in place, incentives stay in place. And it comes out of democracy, really. But if you wanted to maybe find a common denominator, that would be probably the oil crisis that Charlotte mentioned. It was such a hard blow to the Danish economy. At that time, everyone said, never again. We can't have that again. The prices for heating your house skyrocketed, and electricity prices skyrocketed. It was just a really hard economic blow. So that sort of set things in motion. But it is really the democracy, and like Charlotte mentioned, the last election in Denmark was, a very climate focused election. And I think it's the first time we saw it, but we even saw Biden and Trump actually debating climate for the first time ever. That in itself says a lot. I mean, you are seeing, I think, the motions in the US as well. You're seeing those cogs and wheels starting slowly to turn, and that's the way to get the smaller voices heard. That, and then what we are very good at in the US is the local level. So cities, counties, usually very, very good at the community outreach, making sure everyone else is on board, the equity piece, the affordability piece. That's maybe something I think the US could share a bit more with the rest of the world.
Yeah, so thank you, Bo, and thank you for this panel. We actually have to move on, but thank you for all the great questions. Because we have to go to this map of the Danish energy ecosystem that this is all about. And before we're going to Eric and Katie, let me just say thank you to both Bo Riisgaard from the Danish Energy Agency and the General Consulate in Silicon Valley, and also Alvin H from Ørsted. Great pleasure having you on board, and I hope you'll stay on to see the map. But yes, so this was the Danish experience. What have we done, and what is the key characteristics? But this map, as Eric introduced, is actually about building the future relations and partnerships, and making sure that we can build the innovations of the future as well, because we need new technologies and we don't have all the solutions yet. And we are very dependent on international relations, including relations between Denmark and the US. So we hope that this map can help also enable that we can have the US stakeholders look at what we can do, but also international stakeholders. I can see that you're joining from across the world, the people on board here. So we hope that this would be a chance to get and build more relations. But that was it from me. Over to you, Eric. What is this map about, and what's the background for building an energy ecosystem map?
We're going to thank you, Shaw. I'm not going to go much deeper than what you've just said. I'm going to speak to the fellows right now. I'm going to ask you all to think, when you see the map, think of ways, use cases of how you might use the map. We think that this map, like I said, is a visual lesson on what the new energy economy transition can look like. But we'd like to push this a little bit further. We've seen people use it, but we want to hear your use cases. So we'll be calling out whatever use cases. We'll ask you to share it. But the way this is going to work is Katie's going to show the map. We're going to go through 2 or 3 use cases ourselves just to show how the map works. By the way, Charlotte, just so you know, you've started Denmark has started the tipping point, I think. Norway wants to see a map. Canada might want to see a map now. Nepal wants to see a map. Hong Kong wants to, and so I speak again to all the fellows. If any of you think that you would like to be involved in a map building project, please let us know. This seems to be, Charlotte, once again, Denmark has led the way in terms of best practices and how we can teach the world this new energy transition. Okay, Katie, let's go to the map. Let's go to the map. Take a look. Okay. There it is. The way this works is on the left is a taxonomy. Every single entity, every single energy venture in Denmark has, we try 3 levels of taxonomy, because much like Ørsted, which has a broad range of interests, we want to capture the range of interests in this map. So each entity has multiple layers of descriptive terms. It also shows location. It's color coded, as you can see. It's also based on location. So, and then you can see the density around Copenhagen, as well as pockets in the surrounding areas as well. So Charlotte, Øyvind, and Bo, also, we're going to do a couple uses, but if you have a specific question that you want us to conduct, and by the way, SISE 10 the year before, they started building about 6 or 7 maps in the Midwest, and the SISE 11 fellowship group right now is going to be using these maps as a way to dig deeper into the local energy economies in the US. But this is their first chance to interact with a map like this at this level of this comprehensiveness. So, okay, so those are all the energy ventures in Denmark. Katie, can you tell us, or Charlotte, do you know how many are there? How many did we find? This was a rigorous.
I think more than 800 or something, I think, or 9. I can't remember.
A little over 900.
900, yeah.
A little over 900.
So in a country with just over 5 million, 5.3 million, is that right, Charlotte?
5.6, but yeah.
5.6 million people, a little over 900 energy ventures. And we didn't include just some guy in a van with a dog that puts solar panels on a rooftop. We actually wanted a formal energy venture, NGO, nonprofit, activist group. Katie, what were you going to say?
And remember, this is still our first draft. We know we've missed energy companies, so there are more out there as well.
And there will be more energy companies, and they will let us know if we're missing them, and then we will get them into the map quickly. So let's just do a general search, Katie. Show the audience that's on the delayed feed and also the fellows. Can you do wind? You're doing wind. There we go. So it sorts. So Katie, can you show us again? You did clear all and then you clicked on wind. Is that right?
Right. So we have the option to pick all of the different options or to clear and selectively go in and look at a specific sector. So here are all companies that were deemed to have something to do with wind energy. Quite a few.
Can you also now do click on solar so you can see a multi-sector comparison?
So there's wind and solar together.
Wind and solar. Can you clear all? And I'm just curious, Charlotte, you mentioned that there's no, can you do nuclear? I'm just curious.
Oh, we have something going on with two.
Yeah, I
click
think
in?
there's 2 research institutions maybe on
Can you
nuclear.
click on them, Katie? So this is how the map works too. You can
Yeah.
see what they do. That's a good opportunity to show. Can you do the other one? All right, Katie. How level of detail, can it sort by company name? Like, oh, for instance, Ørsted.
So there are 2 locations for Ørsted actually, sorry. Here we have one that is in Frederick.
Russia, yeah.
There we go. That's what I was going to say. And then we have another one over here in Copenhagen. Or, I'm sorry, near Copenhagen. How would you pronounce that one, Charlotte?
Gentofte.
There you go.
Yeah.
Oyvind, how's this looking so far, Oyvind?
No, that's correct. And the
Okay. So far, so good.
that's
That was pressure,
that's
Oyvind.
my office that you're pointing out
What's
there.
that?
Yeah, that's my office that you're pointing out there, Katie.
So far, so good. Henriette asked if one of the fellows, Katie, can you clear all and do universities? Does universities?
We can do academia and research.
Wow. Did Oyvind and Bo and Charlotte, did you attend a university in Denmark?
I did one in
attended,
Copenhagen.
yeah, and I did the Technical University of Denmark, DTU. I think if you search
Oh, where's DTU? Where is that located? Katie, you're going to push this. This is.
It might be with the Danish spelling.
I just put in DTU acronym. There you go. The bottom one. There you go. That's my old campus.
All right.
We're holding our breath. This is phenomenal. Fantastic. Okay, what can you drill into? I don't know how to do this, Katie. A location such as Esbjerg. Esbjerg, is that? Did I pronounce that correctly, Charlotte? Esbjerg.
I think that was good. Yeah, exactly. And I think what's interesting here is you can see Edgeberg here, there's actually an ecosystem in itself. So this is the Danish wind energy hub to a large degree, and that's where big parts of the offshore wind energy components are shipped off from this harbor in Edgeberg to the rest of the world offshore wind parks. So there's a lot of the companies here working within the wind energy value chain in one way or the other, at least. Yeah.
Wow, interesting. So the location has a purpose. It is also for trade, import, export, movement of goods and services. Wow, interesting. Okay,
it actually it used to be oil and gas city for all the offshore oil and gas exploration, and a lot of these companies actually changed in a green direction. And it's
Katie,
now.
Can you keep the map where it is in that town? I'm going to pronounce it Esbjerg, Charlotte. I am so sorry. Can you clear all? Then do a search for wind and oil and gas, but first wind, and now do oil and gas. Interesting. So there's your transition, Bo. Take away oil and gas.
Visual.
Okay. What's that?
Very visual. I like that.
Yeah.
And remember, if the company stays there, it's because maybe they're in that transition right now where they are doing both.
Yeah, and also written in the chat, I think some of them noticed that a lot of them have several colors, so they are taxonomized in 3 categories as it says. So some of them are probably mainly wind, but are also doing oil and gas still, and are part of that transition, as you're saying as well, Katie.
Right.
Bo, you mentioned sort of in passing, or at least indirectly, we could say that there's a transition. We can read a list of the companies transitioning, but there's something about seeing it on a map, isn't there, Bo? You know what I mean? That you can do that visual comparison and see more deeply.
Yeah, it really emphasizes the specific areas. Now, Edgeberg is a special city because it's located, towards the oil and gas exploration. It's really, if any of you ever get a chance to go to Denmark and go to Edgeberg, you should go to the harbor and see the size of the wind turbine industry for yourself. It's bigger than you would imagine.
I think there you go. Our fearless leader, Thomas, has 2 locations he goes to. Maybe now there'll be a 3rd. Okay, so the fellows, I'm going to ask you all for use cases. We've been talking enough about it. Would love to. I'm going to call on a couple of. If you have a use case, just let us know in the chat. But Sam, I'm going to go to you first with a potential. Oh, Sam, go ahead. Talk to us about what you see as a use case. And other fellows, please put in the chat if I can call on you. We have about 5 minutes.
So I see this as like a really useful tool for identifying companies that might be able to work together on a combined effort. For example, you have your 2 nuclear startups, but there are also in Copenhagen companies that work on geology and companies that work on chemistry and hydrogen, all within Copenhagen, and as well as throughout Denmark, but they are all co-located in that same city. And so they can, if perhaps communicating with each other, develop stronger policies and initiatives as a combination to accelerate this clean energy transition.
I think Sam is seeing the benefits of that visual when you see the proximity of. Thank you, Sam. That's a great one. Adele, I'm not going to call on you yet. I'm going to give you a second to think about it. But you had a question, Adele, earlier about underrepresented or forgotten communities, and I was wondering if you see a way of using this map to maybe enhance or speak to or provide benefit for those communities that seem to be missing in the transition, not just Denmark, but any. Use this as a microcosm of a larger purpose. But while you're thinking about that, Mirza, functional areas, talk to us. What does this mean?
Okay, so I was thinking, if besides this graph, if you come up with residential areas, you already have universities and like grocery stores, like everywhere that's for people's leisure, then you can technically help electric vehicle companies to come there and have their charging stations. So for example, let's say if you find that area that has a cinema, then you can find the closest company in terms of like that vehicle to grid and infrastructure, because then their transportation cost would be so much cheaper if you want to consider A to B kind of problem. And then based on like, and as I said, another map that can tell you about residential areas, leisure places, like grocery stores, stuff like that, then you can actually help with electric transportation as well. That's what I was thinking.
Wow, thank you, Mirza. Okay. Huh. So here we go. So then Mirza, it's like a pebble is dropped in and you start to see the ripples in the pond. Tolu, you had a question. Grace, you had a question. Tolu, let's go ahead. Tolu first.
Yeah. From what I just saw, especially the former oil and gas area that was talked about, I think this can help us to also decide how to get jobs in a particular sector. For instance, the wind, the previous oil and gas sectors that have now taken a new way of doing things. So one could use it to get job opportunities or collaborative spaces. For instance, if you're in Copenhagen, there will be a lot of opportunities there and a lot of things you can do, from moving to academic settings to, circular economy. Basically, I've seen a lot of that on the map. So I think that's one of the functions of this map.
Thank you. Thank you. Practical. That I like that you said. That brings it personalized. It. I like that one. Chaitanya, you had your hand raised. Let's go for it. And then Gracie.
Definitely. I think one amazing use could be for up and coming ventures where they could easily use this for like ecosystem mapping and then finding their customer base, like B2B customer base through this. For instance, like how I would have probably used it is would have seen hotspots for wind farms and solar farms, and then seen nearby refineries and try to find those locations as a place where I would probably place my electrolyzer. So things like that. Something pretty similar to what Sam was also saying.
You're speaking, Chaitanya, you're speaking from personal interest, right? Aren't you doing a startup?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's because I try to do this with Google Maps all the time. Like I try to find data from EI on where the wind farms are, where the refineries, and then try to see which are the areas I could work with. So this is something that would save me hours of work.
Wow. Gracie, you have a question, and I think, Gracie, your question can probably lead into Adele's. Go ahead, Gracie.
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking more about the urban planning aspects of this map, kind of similar to what Mejra said. But this map could definitely be used to establish a grid that is interconnected and resilient, and it could also be used to plan the urban layout of the city and to identify buildings that need to be updated with better energy reduction efficiency.
Thank you. So urban plan, I like that. That's great. That's great. And you can start to see supply chains and relationships. I think what was the name of Estia, if you see a gap, a missing link in the supply chain, that's an opportunity for a new business, or the public-private partnerships that Charlotte and team were mentioning. Adele, you have a couple questions about equity and communities, Adele?
Sure. Yeah, I was seeing the map.
Adele?
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, a little better.
Okay. Sorry. I was looking at the map, and one use case that could potentially be used for this would be for equity concerns and being used collaboratively with cities and these more frontline communities that are impacted. And it could also be used as a good visual to identify areas where there are current inequities or where environmental concerns may pose more of a risk for certain areas. And it's also a very good storytelling component just because it's so visual. It could be used to communicate communities' experiences in the area and form these connections that are at the basis of the Denmark energy transition.
Wow.
Could I add on to that really quickly, Eric?
Sure. And then we're gonna, I think we go ahead. Yes.
To tie on to that, I believe that there's another element of this that will come in the future. If we were to go back in 2 years and see how these companies have changed, perhaps how their focus may have changed in 2 years, there's a time lapse image that we'll have to see that evolution as well, which should be very interesting.
That's a good point. Over time. Fizz has a great question about opportunities.
Yeah, so I was just looking into the map and I just tried playing with some of the factors. So one came up was the environmental remedial measures, which were quite scarce and quite widely spread out. And there were particular regions which were mainly, I believe, the denser regions. We didn't have this particular factor. So I guess when we are thinking about where companies should be placed, this factor could kind of come into interplay, that probably where it's more needed should the target should be where there's more need compared to where's the most famous or more susceptible area for a new company locationing. I mean, this could be something that could point towards the future, where you could actually interconnect your need rather than just where you want to locate a company. So, I mean, I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it does. It does. I think you're using it visually to target strategic action. I like it. So we do have to wrap up, and Charlotte, get ready. But I do, Alexandra, can you ask your? I find it interesting on the surface, Alexandra.
Yeah, sure. So I was thinking that the map code, if it complete, you could also it could also help with accountability and transparency. As we were looking for nuclear, and we saw those two dots, and we found out those were startups and not really nuclear plants per se. So I guess it could also serve as a kind of accountability measure that you can see, they say they're using 100% green energy, and then you click on it and you see this taxonomy that they're also using this other type of energy that is not green. So I guess it can also help keep track and companies accountable, and not only companies, but also countries. You can see the whole grid.
Wow, thank you. By the way, Charlotte, we've got a lot of questions about just using it for partnerships. It's exactly what we were hoping for. We're going to stop. I just want to say, Charlotte, we started working on this project long ago. I had no idea that it would actually also be fun to work with you and your team too. It has been a lot of fun, and the value just is getting started. And fellows, thank you. Charlotte, you get last word, and then, well, Thomas always gets last word, but Charlotte, you get second to last word.
Thank you, Eric. And just first of all, to all of your input, I'm very impressed and honestly super inspired. We are usually the ones sharing all the experiences from Denmark, but I'm very impressed and overwhelmed with all your great ideas that I don't think either Eric or Katie of me ever thought of when we developed this map. So that's just so impressive, the way that you can think about utilizing this. And we're just happy that somebody actually sees a potential in it as well, other than ourselves. So yeah, thank you so much. And I can see some of you already know Denmark super well, more than we do ourselves, with all the nuclear startups, and you visited half of Denmark already and so on. But just to all of you, if you ever come to Denmark, you are very welcome to reach out to me instead of Green, and you can come by our offices and we can talk more and share more knowledge. Also, thank you to Bo and Øyvind for your great input and experiences. Bo is in the US, and Ørsted is also having a huge engagement in the US as well. So I'm sure you're also welcome to reach out to them. And then, of course, a huge thank you to all the partners behind this map. All these 900 stakeholders that we mapped here is only because we've worked together closely with our partners who helped us give all the input on who we should know. And we are not even finished yet, as Katie said. We need to put even more people on and companies on this map. And then a huge thank you to the SISE conference. This has been a great experience for us to be part of, and to American Energy Society for reaching out. And I also just want to mention and give a shout out to the Innovation Center in Silicon Valley, and Stephanie, who's not on board with us today, but she's really been driving this whole process and been making follow-ups and making sure that we actually did this project. So a big thank you to Stephanie.
Stephanie's been amazing, hasn't it? Yeah, Stephanie's been amazing.
So yeah.
Charlotte, I'm so sorry to interrupt. We've got, but by the way, I don't know if you noticed in the chat, all the fellows, they want to hold the next conference in Copenhagen. So they're ready to go, Charlotte.
Let's do that. We're ready to welcome you. Yeah.
In the meantime, can the fellows connect with you all by LinkedIn? I keep pushing LinkedIn until then.
Ready. Well, LinkedIn, you're welcome. And we also, on stateofgreen.com, you can just find my email directly. It's there, and I can make sure to connect you to whoever you want to. And also all the people on the map, as you can see, you can go to their websites and engage with them directly as well. So yeah, but just a big thank you to this, and very excited to be launching the map today. It's been very interesting, and also just impressed by all your input. So I think that was it from me, Eric. I don't know if you have any last comment. Otherwise, let's give it over to Tom.